Hey, Jacques here. This video, I'm showing you how to create an awesome, modern, responsive, great looking service section for your website design. Now, what am I using? I'm using Figma to do this. I'm using auto layout. This entire video is part of a huge video where I'm creating a yoga fitness studio website in Figma. On top of that, and this is why this video is kind of different, it's kind of unique, is I am designing this entire website using the Bootstrap framework. And when I say Bootstrap framework, I'm using 5.3, which is the latest at this point as of now. Make sure to check it out. Now, in the description below, I have all the media assets. I also have the full Figma design in the community of Figma. You can use it, you can duplicate it, you can make use of it. Whatever you want to do with it, you can do it. Again, in this video, we are creating a service section that you can use, a modern looking, responsive service section. So let's check it out. All right, so now that we've completed our slider section and our navigation section, and by the way, when I say completed, it doesn't mean we are absolutely done with it. We'll still constantly make a few changes throughout the video. But with that said, what I want to do now is I actually want to create different variations. So let's go ahead and zoom out. I'm going to take tablet view and mobile. I'm going to hold in shift and I'm just going to move it to the right hand side. I'm going to click on desktop view, do the same, but I'm just going to move it to the left. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to create or duplicate what we have already created, because later on in the video, we are going to create a different variation of this. A good tip I can give you is always have multiple variations. And I found, in my personal opinion, that creating sections in their own frames make it so much easier to create different variations. So with that, I'm going to change desktop view to slider-01, and I'm going to do the same with this one. I'm going to say slider-02. Now, we're just going to leave the slider as is. Later on in the video, we'll make a few changes as we wrap up this design. All right, so let's jump into creating the services. So I'm going to take my frame tool and I'm going to drop it onto the artboard. I'm going to make sure that the width is 1920. So on the right-hand side, we can see it's 1920. The height at this point, we don't need to worry about it. Why? Because we are going to use auto layout. So I'm just going to rename this frame 1 to our services. Obviously, we're probably going to change the naming later on in the video. But now with that done, we're going to zoom in and we're going to have a look at this. So first thing I want to do, I'm going to click on our services and I'm going to activate auto layout. Now you're going to see that it says hug. At this point, that's all right. But I want to make sure that on the right-hand side, I set a fixed on 1920 because I don't want to start designing and the width gets impacted. Now with our auto layout set in our services, we got to create a container again. Now you can go ahead, go back and copy the container and put it into this frame, but let's create it from scratch. So with our services selected, I want to add a little bit of padding at the top and bottom. So I'm going to go with 96. And I'm going to explain why I'm going with 96. When we navigate back to the Bootstrap and we go and have a look at spacing, you'll notice that Bootstrap does come, and I think I've mentioned this earlier in the video, it does come with pre-baked, pre-made spacing that can be used. And it can be used in margin, it can be used in padding, and so forth. So by default, you have number 5, which in our case would be PY5. So when I go back here and we look at the padding that we set, we would, for example, set it as PY5. But we won't use 5 because 5 is actually 48 pixels. So how do I measure that? Well, when you look at this, it says spacer times 3. So spacer is normally default 16px, which is 1 rem. So if you open up a calculator and go 16 times 3, it comes down to 48. Once we start developing this website, I'll show you how you can actually add an extra spacing in the variables itself. So in our case, what we'll do is we'll add a spacing number 6, and instead of multiplying it by 3, we will multiply it by 6, thus giving us a total amount of 96 because it's 48 plus 48. So coming back to our design, I like big spaces between sections. This is why I've specifically selected 96. All right, so now that we have padding top and padding bottom set to 96, we are going to reuse the container we already created. So to do that, I'm going to go back to my slider 1 and I'm literally going to copy the container. Once I've hit Control C, I'm going to navigate to our services and we're literally going to paste it in there. I normally use Control V to do that. Now with that done, we can actually clean out the container and add a few rows and columns. Now in this part of the video, we're starting to use the rows and columns. So with that said, I'm going to take all this and I'm going to clear it all out. Okay, it's nice and clean. And with that done, we are going to take the text tool and we're going to drop it in. Now I'm going to add a heading and subheading. Now notice as I'm adding stuff, the height is constantly changing, and it's because, like I mentioned, it is set to hug. I'm going to type in our services. You're going to notice that it's all uppercase. I'm just going to change that. I'm going to turn off the uppercase feature so that we can see our services. So with that, I'm going to hit Control D, and we're just going to say subheading to explain more. Now with that done, we just need to go and set the styling. So I'm going to click on our services and I'm going to select the properties. Let's go and select heading 1. Let's see how that looks like. That's a little too small for my taste. I'm going to detach that and let's see how display 4 might look. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I like that. Let's go and change the color. So exactly the same how we've done it in the previous part of the video. So I'm going to set that to gray 800. And we are pretty much going to do the same for the subheading. So navigating. I normally like to use body base for subheading. If you feel like that's too small, you can definitely change that. All right, with that done, I'm going to select both of them and I'm going to regroup them. Call this heading. With that done, I am going to navigate to the right-hand side, select auto layout, and we're going to change the gap to 0. Last but not least, I'm going to take this heading and I'm going to group it again and I'm going to call it row. Now we actually starting to use the rows and columns of Bootstrap, part of our design. All right, so with row selected, I am going to change the width from fixed to full, the actual container, because this is basically what a row would do in a Bootstrap scenario. With that, I'm also going to activate auto layout and I am going to set the alignment to center. Now you're going to notice that it doesn't do anything at this stage. We just got to go to our heading, click on the actual heading auto layout, and we want to change this fixed to hug. And once you've done that, you'll see that everything is in the center. But we're not finished here yet. So I just want to center this and there we go. That's looking good. Last thing, and this is just my personal preference, I want to zoom in and do the same as what we did with the previous font. I just want to make this a little bit more realistic. So I'm going to bring this up a little bit, get rid of that extra spacing. Go to the heading, make sure I've selected the heading on the left-hand side. Just going to add the proper spacing, which in this case is going to be 12. All right, so let's zoom out. I'm going to look at preview and just click the arrow on the right-hand side. And there we go. We're starting to create something here. Okay, so heading is completed. I'm going to right-click and we're going to create a component for this. When we navigate back to assets and we scroll down, we'll see under homepage, we have our heading already made for us. We can reuse this entire container and the row for our heading. And because the headings are always going to be centered, it's always going to be in this kind of layout, this should be fine. All right, so now that we're done with the heading, I'm going to go back to section 1. I'm going to copy this container, go back to our services. I'm going to paste that in. And you're going to notice that it puts it side by side. So we just got to click on the auto layout of the frame itself. We've got to change the orientation. So with that, I'm also just going to add a bit of spacing gap. So I'm going to make it 45, which is going to be spacing number 5 in Bootstrap itself. And we're just going to clean out this container. I'm going to start from scratch. The next step is we need to add the services. So to do that, we are going to start with an icon. So I'm going to click on the container. I'm going to open up plugins and we're going to open up Iconify. And once that's open, we're going to start adding our first service. So our first service is going to be spa area. So let's see what happens if we type in spa. All right, looking at these icons, I like the first one. First one looks good. I'm just going to import it right here. And as I imported it, I'm going to change the frame to group. It is selected as group. And now I am going to increase the actual width and height. Now I did select the constraint properties. I want to make this bigger. So I'm just checking the actual size of our icon by going back and forth in preview mode. Just want to increase this to perhaps 80 and see how that looks like. Yeah, that looks good. And now with that done, I'm going to change the color. With this, I'm going to change it to our primary color. Let's go back to preview and see how that looks like. Yeah, that looks good. Now with that done, I'm going to take the text tool and we're going to drop that in as well. And I'm just going to type out spa area. Now with that done, I'm going to select the text and we are going to add a property to it. I feel like that is a little too big. I'm just going to change that to maybe heading 5, see how that looks like. Too small, so let's go for heading 4. All right, now we just need to change the color. I'm going to stick with 800. With the heading styled in, we are going to add a little bit of paragraph text. So I'm going to hit the text tool, just going to drop it in wherever. Just going to do that for now, and I'm going to select it, and we are going to change the properties to base. Just going to move this down, and so with it being there, I'm going to use a plugin, and we're going to add lorem ipsum. I'm going to do this because I don't want the video to end up being 5 hours, rather be it a little shorter. So with this plugin selected, I am going to select paragraph, and let's make one paragraph and generate it. Beautiful. I'm going to zoom out because it did create a lot here. And we just going to change this to fixed. Let's make it 200. Zoom in. We're just gonna trim this down a little bit. Select this, just get it down. Okay, with that done, we now have our icon, we have our heading, and we have our paragraph copy. Okay, now that we have these items, we actually need to let it look like something. So I'm going to extend it a little bit, and I'm going to change the alignment to center. Then I'm going to take the icon and the heading. I'm going to group it again, and we are going to call it service spa. I'm going to add auto layout. I'm going to center it, and I'm going to decrease the gap. Let's just change it to 35 for now. I'm going to have a look at the preview. It's getting closer. Now I'm going to take the actual heading and paragraph and regroup it. And the reason I'm doing this is because you can actually set a different gap when activating auto layout. So I'm just going to change the naming convention to content, add auto layout, and let's change this to be 15. All right, so now with that done, I'm going to go back to service spa. I'm going to add a full. We are going to use a nice little gray full. So maybe 300, that's too much. Change that to 200, too much. Let's see how 100 looks like. That's too light. So let's go for 200. Now with that done, we're adding a bit of padding. So I'm going to add 35 by 35. Have a quick look how that looks like. Yeah, that looks good. And now last but not least, I'm going to give it a rounded finish. And there we go. We have our first tile. Just want to add a component to this. I'm going to add a button. I'm going to select our service bar, go to assets. I'm going to drag in a button. All right. I'm just going to rename this. I'm going to say learn more. I want to see if we have any specific options for our buttons. I'm just going to play around with this a little bit. I'm going to go with medium so it's a little smaller. Just have a peek. Yes, that looks good. And we just want to see if there's an outline version, perhaps. Okay, so that doesn't look good. So we definitely want to modify this because this is what we want, but not exactly what we want. So I'm going to click on the button on the left-hand side, and we're going to click on Go to Main Component, which is going to navigate us back to components. We're just going to modify this guy. So first off, I'm going to change the color. I'm going to change this to primary. Next, I want to change this background. I want to remove the background. There we go. Now, when we look at the preview, it's looking like something I want. I just feel like I can increase the actual border a little bit more because the border is quite thin on the button itself. Doing that, we're going to look at the border properties here on the right-hand side. I'm going to change it to 2 and see how that looks like. Let's see if I can actually decrease this font. Maybe that will work just a slight bit. I want a more realistic view, so I'm just going to say full screen. There we go. All right. One thing I do want to change is the actual roundness. So let's change the roundness to 8. A little bit more, maybe 12. Too much. Let's go for 10. Let's go halfway. There we go. Okay, last but not least, I just want to change the actual spacing. So I'm going to go back to my home page. I don't like the spacing in between here. So again, just to get rid of the top and bottom of the actual text itself, I'm just going to decrease this a little bit. And let's see if we can increase this to 25. Not exactly what I want yet. I'm going to group the button and the paragraph. I'm going to auto layout this guy again, and we can change this to 35 and see how that looks like. There we go. All right, so now that we have the first tile, we can literally just take this and copy it. I'm going to zoom out. Before we do this, I'm going to make this another component. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to create component. I'm just going to have a look at our assets. You're going to see that it's right here. So now with that being another component, we need to add a row to this. I'm going to take this, group it again, change it to row, add auto layout to row, change the width to full. So now we're getting closer. Okay, so now that we've done that, we have two options here. We can either take service bar, hit Control D, and duplicate it. And you're going to see that it puts it next to each other. The other option is you can go to assets and you can drop it in as well. So it's completely up to you. I normally just do the whole duplicate thing. It saves a lot of time and effort. So I'm just going to create 3 of them. And we're just going to, within the row, add the spacing. We're going to change it to 48. See how that looks like. All right, so now one thing I want to do is I actually want 4 boxes instead of 3. To do that, we're going to take our actual first one. We're going to duplicate it again. You're going to notice when you do that, that it's going past our container. So this is not ideal. So we need to modify it a little bit. So to do that, we're going to select all of them at once and we're going to change the HUD to full container. And there we go. By changing it to full content, it will mathematically and strategically set the width for everything to fit within the container itself. So that's what we want. All right, now I'm going to adjust the actual roundness. I feel it's too much. So with that, I'm going to select all of them. I'm just going to decrease this perhaps to 30. There we go. It looks good. All right, so now we can go in and change some of the other headings as well. So I'm going to say changing room on this one. Let's change this one to free lessons. Oh, that's a spelling mistake for sure. Let's change this one to free rugs. All right, now with that done, we need to change the icons. I'm going to go within, open up Iconify again. Clean this out. It should be at the top here. There we go. Type in rest. Yeah, I don't like any of those. Toilet maybe. Yeah, that looks good. I'm going to take that one, import it. Now, it's not importing where I want it to be. I'm just going to close this guy real quick, change this to group. And for us to get this in here, you can't literally drag it in. You'll see it won't allow you to do that. And the reason for that is because it's set as a component. So we need to select this changing room and we just need to detach instance. We're going to do that for all of them. Okay, and I'm going to take my icon, cut it, select this icon, minimize everything within that group, and we're going to paste in our new icon. Okay, last but not least, we just want to move this guy up. Now, I'm going to constrain properties, and we need to change it so that it matches the rest of them. Now, one little tip I can give you is you always want to make sure that your height of your icon is set the same as the rest of them. Because icons have different widths and heights, I normally set and manage it based on the height. There we go. Have a look at preview. Just need to change the full to our color. Looking good. I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of them as well. So I encourage you to select your own icon. So while I do this, go ahead and play around and select your own icon. Okay, so I made a few adjustments to my icons. And one thing I did was I changed the spot area. And instead of it being a full, I changed it to being a stroke. I also didn't like the toilet that we added. So I changed that to a better icon. Again, this is all about you playing around with icons in that Iconify and find something that really works for you. I also added this beautiful icon that's just showing the rugs itself. So with that said, we are super close to our services section. I want to, however, make a few adjustments. And this is also part of you learning and me teaching you a few cool stuff. So first off, I'm not a fan of this gray. And it looked great when we started with it, but as I was designing, I really just didn't like it. So we're going to change that. We're going to change that up so that it really matches well with our slide colors and with our primary colors. So to do that, I'm going to select our services here, and we're going to change this gray. We're going to change it from 200 to light. Obviously, that's not the color we want, but we're going to go to foundation and we're going to change this up a little bit. Now, I've selected light as a color, so I want to zoom in and I want to look at the light option. So when I zoom this out a little bit and just look at everything, I believe that it's going to be this color. So I'm going to select it and we're going to click on the color itself. We're going to click on the settings. And over here, we are going to paste the color that I want. Awesome. I'm going to navigate back to my homepage and let's see if that adapted. Just going to zoom in and there we go. It changed from that gray to a more pleasing light color. Okay, so now with this done, I just want to hit the preview button. I want to get that opened up. Just going to move my arrows to the right here. Click on the arrow right. It's looking better. I really like this color. It really fits well with the green as a primary color that we've selected. I want to make a few changes. So I want to navigate back. And what I want to do is I want to add a couple of arrows here on the bottom right side of the actual services section. But I'm also going to create that effect where the tile is cutting off into the side of the services section. So really giving the user the idea that they can scroll to the right. To do that, we're going to select all of the services on the left-hand side, all 4 of them. We're going to change the width full to fixed width. And once we've done that, we're literally going to take the first service option and we're going to control and duplicate it. Now you're going to see that it's basically duplicating it, putting it right next to it. But we're going to select row and we're going to change the actual alignment to be left. And once you've done that, you'll see that it's cutting off one of them. It's kind of what I'm looking for right now. With this done, I want to take this row and we're going to duplicate it. We're going to open it up and I'm just going to clean everything out that's within it. Now we have a clean row to work with. Now with this row being clean, I'm going to add a couple of icons in here. The icons that I want to go for is left and right. So I'm going to start with arrow left. Look for something that I want. Actually want this one. So we're going to import it. That looks good. We're going to change the frame to group. I'm just going to increase it because when I look at it, it's pretty small. So I'm just going to constrain the properties. Maybe change it to 50. Let's see how 50 looks like. That's too big. Maybe change it to 45. Now with that, I'm also going to change the color of the full itself. I'm going to change it to the primary color. Now that we've done that, we're going to select the icon on the left-hand side. We're going to hit Control D. And we're going to duplicate it. All we're going to do is literally just change the orientation of this. So we're just going to change it to 180. Perfect. So now we have 2 arrows, one going left, one going right. I'm going to group these two. I'm going to activate auto layout again, but I'm going to decrease the gap to 25. And in the row container, we're going to move this to the right-hand side. So let's see how this looks like. Looks pretty good. I want to add a little bit of a opacity to them, just so it kind of blends in a little more. So I'm going to select those two. We're just going to add, let's add 50. That's too much. Let's go for 75. There we go. Okay. One thing I want to do, just want to rename this real quick and go for arrow left and arrow right. Okay. That is done. So now what we've done is we've created this effect where it's cutting off on the side, letting the user know that there's more to it. But now we have duplicated items here. So obviously this is not going to work. Let's go ahead and change this one to something else. something more creative. To do that, we're going to go back and modify one of these services. So obviously, I can't modify the first one because that's the main component or the main asset. But we can definitely modify the second one. So I'm going to click on the second one. We're going to detach the instance. And once I've done that, we're going to move this guy to being the first one. Now we can start modifying it. I'm going to start with the actual background itself. I'm going to detach the actual color that we've already selected, and we are going to select primary color. With that, I am going to select both the heading and text. We are going to choose gray 100. I'm going to do the same for the button here at the bottom as well. Select this button. Probably going to need to detach it. Let's see. There we go. Didn't even need to detach it. So that looks a little different, but we're not there yet. So let's change this spa area to something else. Let's say get started with your free trial. Okay, with that done, I just want to center line it. And so now I want to perhaps increase this font. So instead of using H4, let's try H3. With that, I just want to change the actual width of this to make it full. And let's just remove this extra return that I added. Now with this done, I'm going to take the icon. Let's just look for that. I'm just going to remove it. So this looks different, but obviously doesn't look great at this stage. So let's see if we can change this up a little bit. I'm going to select this actual service. I'm going to increase the padding top and padding bottom so it's a little bigger. Let's see how that looks like. Getting closer. Last thing I want to do is just add a little bit more spacing. So I'm going to change this to 35. For this one, change it to 45. Let's see how that looks like. Last but not least, I'm going to change learn more to get started today, giving it a little bit of a call to action for the user. Let's change this button to be a bit of a bigger button. I'm going to change medium to large. And again, it's going to change to the actual properties of the other button. Just want to change this to our primary color. Okay, so we are getting closer. The only thing I want to do is increase the width a little bit. So maybe let's make it 350. There we go, getting closer. Now, one thing I do want to add is perhaps a shadow. Maybe a good shadow would really fit this well. I'm going to select the service. I'm going to go to plugins, and there's a great plugin I use called Shadow Maker, which makes quite a good shadow overall. All right, so with this open, I'm going to change the shadow to this side about. Let's just see how that looks like. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm just going to up the opacity very, very slightly. Don't want this. See, the problem here with using the shadow is it's not blending well with the color on the other service option. So I'm going to see if we can move the shadow to this side, see if that works. Yeah, that works pretty well. Just going to fine tune it a little bit. So maybe move it down to about over there. Yeah, that looks good. So I'm just going to apply that. Now we have our services section. It looks pretty cool. Looks pretty cool. Now, one thing that is bugging me is this arrows over here on the right hand side. I feel like it's just floating. It's not really at a proper spot. So I'm going to take this, take the row that it's within, and we are going to move it outside of the container. I'm just going to move it just to there for now and move it down. That didn't really do anything. So the reason for that is because of the padding we originally set up for the frame. So I'm just going to decrease the actual padding on the x-axis, change it to 48, 48 being spacing number 5 on Bootstrap. And that looks already a lot better. I'm going to change the last arrow to 100%, and you'll notice that it's a constantly back and forth. Then you change this, then you change that. That's normal. That's part of designing a website. Okay, so it looks pretty good. Just want to see if the actual spacing, yeah, the spacing looks good. Gives the user the ability to see that the actual tile or our service is cutting off, and we have an arrow here for them to move to the right. We also have a get started today free trial kind of call to action. That's the thing when you design a website, you always need to focus on the call to action of anything. It's about user experience at the end of the day. That's why we design websites. Now, I want to add though, throughout this video, later on, we're still going to make a lot of changes. We're still going to make changes to the heading. We're still going to make changes to this heading. And I might actually add a different font because I'm not in love with this font. I don't feel like this font represents this yoga studio. Okay, so to get a close view to what we've already created, we can actually take this frame and just move it up just to see how this would look like together. And it's starting to look like something. It's starting to kind of fit to what we want. All right, so next up, we are going to create a our classes section. So we're going to add a few great images and we're going to add a tab, like the tab system of Bootstrap. It's going to be fun. So let's jump into it.